Okay, this is Ciaran Houston, who's going to observe the performance in football. Ciaran, what I'd like you to do is to watch this clip. It's about 6-7 minutes of a cup final.
Okay.
I think it's under 12. What I want you to do is to look at the strengths of the performance in relation to skills, tactics and fitness. Also look at it with regards to the weaknesses of various people's performance or the team's performance with regards to skills, tactics and fitness. Then if you can prioritise a couple of areas for improvement, and then talk to me about an action plan you put in place to address those areas, and then if you can justify it. And if you want to bring in any theory as you go through as well, that's absolutely fine, but I'll give you an opportunity at the end if you want to, just to bring in anything else that maybe you haven't touched on whilst you talked about your action plan. Is that okay?
That's fine.
So we're going to watch a clip. You can make as many notes as you want to from now on. So there's the clip. And if you want me to stop it, pause, rewind, that's up to you. Okay?
Yeah.
Right, so we'll have a quiet 5 minutes then. Let's make it big screen. Okay, so that pencil runs out the space. you want to keep watching it? I don't know, another couple of minutes or so.
I think I've got quite a few strengths and weaknesses. I'm interested to see when the game, but
What do you want to do? Do you want to
no, I'm not.
You sure?
Yeah,
Go back, or you can carry on watching whatever you're happy with.
Well, I just watch the rest of it just in case.
Okay, that's fine. There you go. That's probably the first half. Yeah. Okay, shall I stop it then?
Yeah.
Okay. Right then, over to you.
Well, to be fair, both sides there was no evidence of like any social loafing on behalf of anyone. There's good sort of social cohesion and interaction within both teams, and this would have a beneficial impact on performance because according to Steiner's model, if there's the absence of interaction or social cohesion, this obviously has a negative impact on performance. So that would be a strength I noticed from both teams as a sort of generalisation. Number 4, White, I think it is, used both feet. He could dribble with both feet, and it's like demonstrating a range of passing with both feet. And this is very positive, especially for an under-12s game, because it shows bilateral transfer, which is the ability to transfer the motor skill learned on your stronger side. So, for example, your right-hand side, and replicate this with similar accuracy and power on your left-hand side, which is so-called weaker side. This is sort of associated with autonomous learners and someone who's definitely experiencing mastery orientation of that particular motor skill. But for White was quite a standout player really, and he was driving on his team throughout the first half and the second half, and this would suggest that he had good cardiovascular endurance, and there's a lot of benefits for this, having this in football, because it basically, namely the benefits are you can extend your aerobic threshold. So the longer or the earlier you can access it and the longer you can use your aerobic threshold for, is definitely a benefit because you can resynthesize 38 ATP from one glucose molecule from the ATP system, and this is done through 3 stages of it, which is aerobic glycolysis, which is the first stage, and this resynthesizes 2 ATP. The next stage is the Krebs cycle, and this again resynthesizes 2 ATP, and the next stage is the electron transfer stage, and this actually resynthesizes 36 ATP, so 38 as a whole, and this is advantage to using lactic acid system if you had less efficient cardiovascular endurance, and this only resynthesizes 2, and the ATP/PC system only resynthesizes 1 ATP per glucose molecule. So this is definitely a benefit of being able to have good cardiovascular endurance within sport. Also maintaining his position, this was done quite well from all sides. It was obviously quite a high level because it's a cup final. This shows that the majority of them are optimally aroused, and they've got the optimum attentional control. So this is known as selective attention. They're selecting and responding to relevant and correct cues. They're not being drawn to the main stimuluses, which is the ball. They're maintaining their relevant cues to their position, and this prevents social inhibition. If you are over-aroused, this can lead to hypervigilance, and if you're retrospectively, if you're under-aroused, this leads to information overloads. But I said they were optimally aroused, and this was a strength of this. Moving on to the weaknesses, yellow 7 demonstrated a few times the ball was played towards him, and he just missed control. I don't know if this is the occasion again getting to him, but it was a noticeable thing towards the end. Passing was an issue for yellow 7 as well. So when he got the ball, he was just kind of giving it away, and his selection of passing wasn't great. He was either going long when there was probably a shorter pass on, and it's more than likely due to his sort of lack of skill, but it could be responsible to. It could also be applied to the idea that he's being filmed in the presence of a camera, in the presence of the occasion, and this would increase his arousal. And I'd say he was at the cognitive sort of associative stage of learning anyway, and according to Zajonc, when you're at this stage of learning, if arousal increases, you're more likely to pick your dominant response, and unfortunately for cognitive learners, their dominant response tends to be incorrect. So if they're choosing this dominant response as a result of increased arousal, they're going to get it wrong, and this again leads to social inhibition. So I'd say that was a weakness. And yellows seem to be tiring towards the end, and I know it went into extra time, so they'll probably be using their lactic acid system, because by the time of 120 minutes, your glycogen stores will probably be getting depleted. And if you're having to sprint for a ball, you'll be definitely using the lactic acid system, and that's an example of when that was used. And also ATP/PC was used in the first half when a striker quite relatively near the start of the game sprinting towards a ball, because it would be the first time he did this, so his PC stores would be good. And after half time, he'd have probably used it again, because it can be they're replenished after 75% after 30 seconds. So during a 15-minute half time, I'm sure his PC stores were restored. So yeah. I'd say his main issue was passing, because it let his team down. Although his control wasn't great either, Yellow 7's passing wasn't good, and it sort of interfered with the flow of the game. So the skill of passing is an open skill, because it requires decision making outside, and this is normally determined by the movement of either opposition players or your own players. So you have to respond to this. It's also a discrete skill, because it has a clear beginning and it also has a clear end. So obviously the start of the pass is when you go to pass it, and the end is when you pass the ball. And it also has recognisable stages, and I can break these down into the preparation stage, which is involved when you're placing your non-kicking foot by the side of the ball, and this involves extension of mainly the knee joint, and the muscles involved in this would be the rectus femoris, which is contracting, and its antagonistic pair, the bicep femoris, which is relaxing. And also this involves extension of the hip joint when you place your foot by the ball, and this is mainly responsible, the muscle mainly responsible for this is the gluteus maximus. And then, as well in the preparation stage, you bring your leg back, and this is the opposite of the experience of putting your leg by the ball. So there's flexion of the knee joint, and there is also there's flexion of the joint. This is the rectus femoris, and then this is now the bicep femoris contracting and the rectus femoris relaxing. Okay, so the execution stage now, and this is mainly when you're bringing the ball, your leg through to kick the ball. So this would be flexion of the hip, and the muscles involved in this are the iliopsis, the sartorius, and the rectus femoris, and this is what allows flexion of the hip. During the preparation stage, I've got to say the hip plays a vital role in terms of stability. Because it's a ball and socket joint, it's a naturally pretty sturdy joint anyway, but in the hip particularly there's 5 ligaments surrounding it which add to the stability of the joint. So another thing that is worth considering when you're passing the ball is Newton's second law, which is acceleration, and this is the idea that a force applied to the ball, the change in rate of momentum experienced is directly proportional to the size of the force exerted and in the direction in which the force is applied. So this is worth considering when you're weighting a pass, because the performer needs to be aware, I don't think he was, that if someone's quite close to you and you apply a large force, the ball's going to travel at a faster speed and it'll be hard to control, and that's wrong. And he needs to be more aware of the fact that shorter distances require less force, longer distances require a greater force. And as well, there's an example of a lot of them trying to play through balls, and this would involve, again, considering where to strike the ball, because if you're playing a ball round a defender and into a gap, you need to be looking to do apply angular motion. So you'd be striking the ball slightly off centre, which would result in a curve, and this would be allowing you to curve the ball round the defender. And as there, again, if you're trying to play a ball from A to B, you don't need to strike angular motion, you need to strike the ball in the middle, which is linear motion, which I think they had, or especially 7 had difficulty in doing. Okay. So the skill I'm going to aim to improve would be passing for him. So my action plan, I would have it I'd have it over a 5-week period, and I'd have 3 sessions per week. So these 3 sessions would have mainly 5 principles, well 5 components, and this would be a warm-up, a skill-related drill, which is specific to passing, so I'll explain what these are in a minute. It would then incorporate a 4-minute break during the sessions, and then a conditioned game, and lastly a cool down. the benefits of having a warm-up involved in your session are that the main one is that it reduces the likelihood of injury, and when I'm training 3 times a week, I would want them to be fit, and I don't want them to have injury because then obviously that will hinder the progress of the sessions. So the main benefits included are that it releases synovial fluid, which lubricates the joint. Also increases muscle temperature, which will increase the dissociation of oxygen within the muscles, which is good. It also, I like that it also reduces the overall risk of injury. So that's why I'd include a warm-up.
Yeah.
I'd include a cool-down at the end of the sessions, because again this has benefits, and this would be mainly, it speeds up the removal of lactic acid from within the muscles. It restores them to their pre-exercise state, and it also reduces the risk of DOMS, and that's delayed onset of muscle soreness. And if performers experiencing this, they'd be less likely to be able to participate in the session in the following days. So this is something I'd like to avoid. Okay, and then the 4-minute break I would include in this. I'm just going to try and justify this because it seems like a strange one, and the timing seems quite specific, but I'd have a 4-minute break because towards the end of the session, when I'm looking to progress them, and hopefully they will have progressed, I would encourage them to use some visualization techniques and some imagery. And although this is associated with an autonomous learner, by the end of the program, I'd hope that they were getting towards this stage. And it'd also allow recovery from within the sessions. And like I alluded to earlier, the alactic depth recovery stage only takes 3 minutes to occur, and this will restore muscle stores of hemoglobin, myoglobin, ATP and PC, and it requires 3 to 4 litres of oxygen, but after exercise your respiratory muscles remain high to allow this to happen. So during the 3 minutes there should be ample time for them to recover, and then the second half of the session, which is a conditioned game, they should be fresh and ready to participate in. Okay, so for the first 3 weeks I'd have session 1, 2 and 3 running, and I'd have them in their basic stage, because at the cognitive stage and associative stage learning you don't want to overload information. So my session 1 would simply be passing between gateway cones, and although it seems boring, and it may seem boring to them, I'd explain to them that the importance of repetition and overlearning and updating their schema, which is essential. So they would be made aware of this, and hopefully they'd be more likely to do this. So my session would be basically between the 2 cones, and I'd have them at 3 to 5 metres apart. Have me stood here, them stood there, and we'd work on passing the ball. We'd do a variation of passing. Session 2 would be, I'd have them in the middle, and I'd have them in a group, because, as I alluded to earlier, I think that they might have been affected by the increased arousal of the presence of co-actors, etc. So if this was something they were dealing with, I think training in a group and in a public place as possible, it would help them overcome this, and if they become used to performing it at levels of high arousal, they should be able to do this. Okay, so number 2 would be the boy in the middle, and they would have people on the outside, all with a ball, and they'd be responding to the call, they'd be passing the ball back to their person, and it'd be working on the move, listening and responding to cues, which is also relevant and specific to a game. And my stage 3 would be zones, so I'd have them stood here, and the further away we get, the zones get bigger, and they'd have to pass the ball into these zones. But this is my overview of the session. Before I even started the sessions, I would sit down with them, and I'd ask them to fill out a participant questionnaire. And this would be because I'd need to be made aware of any relevant medical history, any conditions that I need to tailor my programme to. I'd also ask them to give me a demonstration of them doing a variety of passes, so I could further analyse their weaknesses and then find out specifically where to improve on this. And at the start of every session, mainly the first one, I'd show them a perfect model. And because he's a male, he is obviously likes football, he'd respond to like a role model. And according to Bandura, social learning occurs through vicarious experiences. So I'd show them a video maybe of a performer that they would view to be a significant other, be a role model, and be of the same gender, performing the skill perfectly, so then they could respond and hopefully aim to replicate this. Okay, so, and it would also give visual feedback as opposed to just verbal. Okay, so during the sessions, I would aim to give them a variety of extrinsic and intrinsic feedback. So, for example, in the first one, if they did a poor first pass, and it went outside the gates, I would I would give them negative feedback, and hopefully this would this would weaken and hopefully destroy an incorrect stimulus response bond. And then on the flip side of this, I would give them some positive feedback if they got it through the cones, because this will hopefully strengthen and secure correct and desired stimulus response bonds. Okay, so to incorporate the principles of training, which one of them being a progressive overload, towards the end, or towards the sort of second half of the week, I would look to progress these sessions. And the progression of session 1 is I would either make these smaller, I'd make the gap between the cones smaller, so that it's obviously a harder target to get through, and I'd move them out a bit. I'd also add in something which I'd refer to as a fatigue cone, which would be behind the performer. So as they played the ball, they'd have to turn, sprint to the cone and come back, and this would improve their cardiovascular endurance, which is essential as well in PE, because it would be overloading their lactic acid system, and they'd experience the benefits of this. For session 2, I would remove, well, at the start they'd all have a football, but towards the end I'd remove a football, so then and introduce the idea that they couldn't pass the ball to the person they'd received it from, because this would replicate a game-like scenario where they have to turn out, they have to look to pass the ball to another person, and this would altogether bring this in. Okay, so at the start of the thing I forgot to say, I would do a test, which would be an accuracy test, so this would make it a part of the SMART goal, which is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and time-bound. So I would have them complete, I'd literally just stick a target up on the wall, and I'd ask them to strike the ball with a variety of passes into the target and see how many they got out of 20. And by the end I'd like to improve this by probably double, because I know it seems, isn't that much, like really across, considering they're going to have 15 sessions, it shouldn't be that much. So they should be aiming to do this. Throughout the sessions, I would be hoping that towards the end they wouldn't be relying on me giving extrinsic feedback, but they'd be developing some intrinsic feedback, because they'd develop a kinesthesis for the feel of the skill, and hopefully recognise when this was going well, and that would relate back to the more visualisation I'd be using during the breaks. So the conditioned game, I think, would be in keeping with the method I'd use, which would be whole part whole, because this is the most applicable to a discrete skill. So I'd have them complete this during the part of the session. So the condition game would have conditions on it. So for example, I would say you get 5 misplaced passes, and then there'll be sort of a consequence. So say they'll have to do like a lap of the pitch, and this will again improve cardiovascular fitness, but then it will weaken incorrect stimulus response bonds, and this will improve them as a result. So and towards the end, I would want to introduce some kind of variant. So I'd introduce a 4th session to replace one of the original 3, because I don't want them to get bored and experience like a sort of decreased motivation. So my 4th session would just be simply working between 2 cones here, me on this side and the performer on this side, and we'd be sort of moving laterally across, and we'd be passing the balls to each other in time. And this again is quite difficult, well, it's more difficult than the others, because you're on the move, the ball's not in the state of inertia, the ball is moving, and you have to weight it accordingly. So go back to that. This would be, because it's like I said, it'd be a 5-week session with 3 sessions, 5-week period with 3 sessions. This could be viewed as their mesocycle within a macro cycle. And their macro cycle, if they were performing outside of school, could be like the desire to win a cup or a league. But the 5-week mesocycle would be this training session. As well as it be the mesocycle being part of a macro cycle, there'll be mini microcycles as a part of this mesocycle. So for example, the first 3 sessions are geared purely around passing the ball. So this would be an example of a microcycle within a mesocycle. Like I said, like I alluded to, the performer does play for a club here, because obviously they've reached a cup final, and the opportunities to do this in the UK are they're quite good. They're fairly good, especially in football, because of the PESIP initiative launched by the government, which involves a clubs link with certain schools. And our one has a link with several clubs, including Leamington Breaks, which is a community club, and they provide football for all ages, from sort of almost 6 to they have a men's team, which is quite successful. When you look at this in terms of other countries, so America and Australia, namely, the opportunities for participation in football are reduced because traditionally and historically in these countries football wasn't taken to particularly well. As we know in America, after the Declaration of Independence, sports, mainly football, was definitely marginalised because they weren't part of the Big Four. They wanted to get away from their colonial history. They weren't particularly proud of it. They wanted to be an independent state, and football was effectively marginalised and pushed out, so opportunities to participate traditionally have been lower. And as well in Australia, football wasn't taken to particularly well because during the colonial period it was only played by British immigrants, and it was sort of labelled a pommy game. It was quite aggressive, abrasive, and it just received negative attention, and it was ruled out on the idea of sports space. But I think this was more of an excuse to say that there wasn't enough players because they wanted it to be pushed to the side, really. And football also got a bad name in Australia because of the European migrants who settled there after World War II. And this was, they brought with them, although they brought with them sort of a style of more skill and flair, they also brought with them the negatives of sort of modern day football, so like feigning injuries, dissent towards referees, and mainstream Australia really didn't take to this particularly well, and this again led to negative media attention and reduced participation opportunities. But more recently, in Australia particularly, there's been more of an increased opportunity to participate because of the inquiry launched by the government into the governance and management of football, and they sort of held an inquiry and they established in 2002 a new football league, and the federation called the FFA has had like a sort of makeover, which is the main body in Australia. And now as a result there's 1 million people participating within high schools, and it's it's the fastest growing elective sport within the country. So that's
okay.
an example.
Anything else you want to bring in from any of the other areas? So if you think AES first or
something I missed out during my action plan would be that I would as well as giving them negative feedback, I'd give them positive feedback to boost their self-efficacy, which is the specific their sort of perception of their own ability. Because if this would become low, they might be less likely to participate and etc. So I would do this, and as well at the end of my session, I would retest to make sure that the make sure it was achieved, my goal was achieved, and if that was achieved, I'd set a new goal, because I don't want them to experience drive reduction theory, because once they've achieved it, they might think, oh well, I've done it now, and I want them to sort of gear them towards a lifelong participation in a healthy balanced lifestyle. So that's probably what I'd do.
okay. Anything else A2 wise? Are you happy?
No, I think I'm all right.
Okay, good stuff.